Sarah's hands trembled as she slid the plain gold band across the jeweler's counter, her heart pounding with a mixture of defiance and quiet certainty. The elderly jeweler looked up at her with kind eyes, nodding approvingly at her choice, while Mark's mother, Vivian, stood 3 feet away, her perfectly manicured fingers gripping a velvet box containing a 7-carat diamond monstrosity that cost more than most people's annual salary. "Sarah, darling," Vivian said, her voice dripping with manufactured sweetness that barely concealed her disdain. "Are you absolutely certain about this? I mean, it's so simple, so plain. Mark deserves something that reflects his status, don't you think? Something that shows the world what kind of family he comes from?" Sarah met Vivian's gaze without flinching, her green eyes steady and calm. "I think Mark deserves something that reflects our values, Vivian. This ring represents us. Not a price tag, not status, just us." The word us seemed to physically wound Vivian, whose smile tightened into something resembling a grimace. She exchanged a loaded glance with her husband, Richard, who stood near the store entrance, scrolling through his phone with the detached air of someone far too important to be bothered with such trivial matters as his son's wedding rings. Mark stood between them all, his shoulders slightly hunched, caught in the crossfire of two worlds that seemed increasingly incompatible. "Mom, I love it," Mark said quietly, reaching for Sarah's hand. "It's perfect." Vivian's laugh was sharp, like crystal shattering on marble. "Perfect. Yes. Well, I suppose we all have different definitions of that word, don't we?" This wasn't the first battle, and Sarah knew it wouldn't be the last. 3 months earlier, when she and Mark had announced their engagement at the Sterling family's annual charity gala, the reception had been glacial. Vivian had taken one look at Sarah's modest cocktail dress, her lack of designer accessories, her simple updo, and had made a face like she'd just bitten into a lemon. The next day, she'd called Mark 17 times, each call a carefully crafted manipulation designed to plant seeds of doubt about his choice of bride. "She's lovely, darling, truly," Vivian had said during one of those calls, her voice floating through Mark's speakerphone while he and Sarah prepared dinner in his apartment. "But does she understand our world? Does she know what it means to be a Sterling? The expectations, the responsibilities, the image we must maintain?" Sarah had said nothing then, just continued chopping vegetables with precise, measured movements, her face betraying nothing of the storm brewing inside her. She'd grown accustomed to being underestimated, to being dismissed, to having her worth measured by the label on her handbag or the square footage of her apartment. What the Sterlings didn't know, what nobody except her late father's lawyers and a handful of trusted advisors knew, was that Sarah's definition of wealth operated on an entirely different scale than theirs. Her father, Thomas Chen, had been a brilliant but reclusive tech innovator who'd built his empire in the shadows, deliberately staying out of Forbes lists and society pages. When he died 2 years ago, he'd left Sarah everything. Not just money, an entire ecosystem of patents, companies, and investments that generated wealth while she slept. The number was so large it had made her physically ill the first time her financial advisor had shown her the portfolio. $2.5 billion. With a B. But Sarah had made a choice then. A choice her father would have understood. She would live authentically, modestly, true to the values he'd instilled in her, not the lifestyle his money could buy. Now, standing in this boutique wedding dress shop with Mark's sister Jennifer and his cousin Amanda, Sarah was reminded again why that choice mattered. She'd selected a simple, elegant gown, ivory silk, clean lines, no crystal embellishments or cathedral train. It cost $1,200, which to Sarah felt almost extravagant. To Jennifer and Amanda, it was an insult. "Is this a joke?" Jennifer said, holding up her phone to take a photo, presumably to send to their family group chat for immediate ridicule. "Sarah, I'm not trying to be mean, but this looks like something from a department store. My bridesmaid dress for Courtney's wedding cost more than this." Amanda circled Sarah like a shark, her eyes cataloging every detail with predatory precision. "Honey, I know people will talk regardless, but this is just sad. You're marrying into the Sterling family. People will be watching, judging. The photos will be everywhere. Don't you want to look like you belong?" There it was, the word that cut deeper than any of them realized. Belong. As if belonging was determined by zeros in a bank account or recognition of a designer's name. Sarah turned to face them both, her voice steady but firm. "I belong wherever I choose to stand. This dress makes me feel beautiful. That's what matters." Jennifer's laugh was cruel. "Beautiful? Sarah, wake up. This is 2026. Everything is content. Everything is a brand. You're not just a bride. You're the proof of your Mark's taste. And right now, you're stating that Mark has a poor taste. Way poor." The words hung in the air like poison. Mark, who'd been waiting outside with coffee, walked in at precisely the wrong moment, catching the tail end of Jennifer's assessment. His face flushed red, anger and embarrassment warring across his features. "Jennifer, that's enough," he said, his voice tight. "Oh, Mark, don't be dramatic," Jennifer said, waving him off. "I'm helping. Someone needs to tell her the truth. Mom and Dad are already worried enough about this wedding without Sarah turning it into a low-budget disaster." Sarah stepped down from the fitting platform, her movements graceful and controlled, despite the fury building in her chest. She'd dealt with bullies before, boardrooms full of men who'd dismissed her ideas, investors who'd underestimated her intelligence, competitors who'd mistaken her kindness for weakness. The Sterlings were just another version of the same tired story. "I'll take the dress," Sarah said to the consultant, who'd been standing awkwardly in the corner, pretending not to hear the family drama unfolding in her shop. "It's exactly what I want." Later that evening, in Mark's apartment, the weight of the day finally settled on Sarah's shoulders. She sat on the couch, her legs tucked under her, staring at her laptop screen without really seeing it. Mark brought her tea, sitting beside her with the careful attention of someone approaching a wounded animal. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "My family can be difficult." "Difficult," Sarah repeated, the word tasting bitter. "That's a generous description." Mark ran his hands through his hair, a gesture Sarah had come to recognize as his signature move when stress overwhelmed him. "They just don't understand you yet. They don't see what I see. They think money equals worth. Success equals visibility. They've lived in that world so long they can't imagine anything else." Sarah turned to face him, her eyes searching his. "And you? Do you understand why this matters to me? Why I need our wedding to be about us, not about impressing your parents or their friends or living up to some arbitrary standard of luxury?" "I do," Mark said, and the conviction in his voice gave her hope. "I love you because you're real, Sarah. Because you don't play games or wear masks or measure people by their bank accounts. You're the first person I've ever known who sees me, not my last name." It was true. Mark had grown up suffocated by expectations, crushed under the weight of the Sterling legacy. His father had built a mid-sized pharmaceutical company into a regional powerhouse, and Vivian had built her entire identity around maintaining their social position. Country clubs, charity boards, exclusive vacation properties, the right schools, the right connections, the right everything. Mark had rebelled in small ways throughout his life, choosing social work over business school, volunteering at homeless shelters, dating women his mother deemed inappropriate. But Sarah was different. Sarah wasn't rebellion. Sarah was revolution. "I just wish they could be happy for us," Sarah said softly. "I wish they could see that their son is marrying someone who loves him, genuinely loves him, not someone trying to upgrade their lifestyle or access their connections." Mark pulled her close, and for a moment, in the quiet of their apartment, the outside world, with all its judgments and expectations, faded away. But Sarah knew this was just the beginning. The wedding planning process would be a battlefield, each decision a skirmish, each choice an opportunity for the Sterlings to express their disappointment in increasingly creative ways. The next morning, Sarah woke to 17 missed calls from Vivian and a text message that made her blood run cold. "Sarah, we need to talk about the venue. Richard and I have reviewed your proposed budget and location, and we simply cannot allow Mark to be embarrassed this way. We've taken the liberty of speaking with the Peninsula Country Club. They have an opening and will cover the difference in cost. This is not negotiable. Call me." Vivian. Not negotiable. As if Sarah were a child being told what was best for her. As if her opinion, her vision, her wishes for her own wedding were irrelevant details to be overridden by people with more experience in maintaining appearances. Sarah's hands shook as she read the message again, fury building in her chest like a wildfire. She'd chosen a small botanical garden for the ceremony, a place with natural beauty that didn't require elaborate decorations or massive floral installations. It was intimate, authentic, meaningful. The Peninsula Country Club was the exact opposite. It was status incarnate, a monument to exclusivity where memberships cost more than most people earned in a year, and where every wedding was a competition for who could display wealth most ostentatiously. Mark emerged from the bedroom, saw her face, and immediately knew something was wrong. "What happened?" Sarah handed him the phone without speaking. She watched his face change as he read his mother's message, watched the familiar conflict play out in his eyes. He wanted to support Sarah. He wanted to stand up to his family. But decades of conditioning don't disappear overnight. And the Sterling family had spent Mark's entire life training him to prioritize their wishes over his own. "I'll talk to her," Mark said finally. "I'll make her understand." But Sarah knew better. Vivian didn't understand. She conquered. And as Sarah prepared for the next round of battles over catering, guest lists, music, and every other detail that transforms a wedding from a personal ceremony into a public spectacle, she realized something crucial. This wasn't just about one day. This was a test, a proving ground. The Sterlings were measuring her, judging whether she had the strength to survive in their world, whether she could be molded into the kind of daughter-in-law who would maintain their standards and elevate their status. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly imagine, was that Sarah had already survived tests they couldn't comprehend. She'd navigated hostile corporate takeovers, hostile board meetings, and hostile negotiations with some of the most ruthless business people on the planet. And she'd won. Not by playing their game, but by refusing to engage with their rules. The Sterlings thought they were testing her. They had no idea that every condescending comment, every dismissive glance, every attempt to control her choices was being cataloged, remembered, and would ultimately become evidence in a reveal so devastating it would shatter their carefully constructed worldview into a million irreparable pieces. The Sterling family dinner 3 weeks before the wedding was orchestrated with military precision, designed to break Sarah's resolve through coordinated assault disguised as concern. Vivian had invited not just immediate family, but also Mark's uncle Preston, a corporate lawyer known for his ability to identify weakness, and his Aunt Carolyn, whose specialty was psychological warfare conducted through passive-aggressive commentary about lifestyle choices. Sarah arrived wearing jeans and a simple cashmere sweater, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. The moment she entered the Sterling's sprawling estate in Pacific Heights, she felt the collective judgment like a physical force. Vivian's eyes swept over her outfit with barely concealed horror, while Richard's greeting was so cold it could have frozen champagne mid-pour. "Sarah," Vivian said, her voice tight. "We're having a formal dinner. I assumed you'd understand that meant appropriate attire." "I came from work," Sarah said calmly, though she'd actually spent the afternoon at a nonprofit board meeting where her foundation had just approved $3 million in grants. "I didn't have time to change." "Work," Jennifer repeated from the doorway, her tone making the words sound like a joke. "Sarah, you're an administrative assistant at a tech startup. I think they'd understand if you needed to leave early for a family dinner." The misunderstanding about Sarah's career was deliberate on her part. She'd told Mark's family she worked in tech administration, which was technically true. She administered her father's tech empire. She just omitted the part about being the sole owner of 17 companies and holding majority shares in 34 others. Let them think she was a secretary. Their assumptions revealed far more about them than any truth ever could. Dinner was served in the formal dining room, a cavernous space with hand-painted wallpaper and a table that could seat 20. Crystal chandeliers cast harsh light on bone china so delicate it looked like it might shatter if someone breathed too hard. The meal was prepared by their private chef, each course a masterpiece of culinary pretension that prioritized presentation over actual taste. "So, Sarah," Preston said, cutting into his braised short rib with surgical precision. "Mark tells us you're planning quite the modest affair. Very practical of you." The word practical dripped with condescension. Sarah took a sip of wine, an obscenely expensive Bordeaux that Richard had selected specifically to demonstrate his superior taste, and met Preston's gaze steadily. "Mark and I value authenticity over extravagance. We want a wedding that reflects who we are, not who others think we should be." Caroline laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. "Darling, that's lovely in theory. But weddings aren't just personal anymore. They're social currency. They're networking opportunities. They're statements about your family's position and your future trajectory. You're not just marrying Mark. You're marrying into a legacy." "A legacy," Sarah repeated slowly. "Tell me, Caroline, what exactly is this legacy? What have the Sterlings built that's so important it requires compromising the integrity of a wedding ceremony?" The table went silent. Mark's fork froze halfway to his mouth. Vivian's face flushed deep red. Richard set down his wineglass with deliberate force, the sound echoing in the sudden quiet like a gunshot. "The Sterling name," Richard said, his voice low and dangerous, "represents 3 generations of business success, philanthropic contribution, and social leadership. We've built something that matters in this city. We're respected, we're influential, and we didn't achieve that by being careless about how we present ourselves." Sarah nodded thoughtfully, as if genuinely considering his words. "Respected by whom? Influential where? Because from where I'm sitting, respect that's contingent on the size of your venue or the cost of your centerpieces isn't respect at all. It's fear. Or maybe just shallow social climbing dressed up as tradition." Jennifer gasped audibly. Amanda's eyes went wide with shock. Mark looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair, but Sarah had reached her limit. She'd endured weeks of subtle digs, passive-aggressive suggestions, and outright attempts to hijack her wedding. The facade of politeness was exhausting, and she was done maintaining it. "Sarah," Mark said quietly, urgently, "maybe we should—" "No," Sarah interrupted, her voice firm but not angry. "I'm tired of maybe we should. I'm tired of keeping quiet while your family treats me like I'm some kind of embarrassment they need to fix or hide or remake into something more acceptable. I'm marrying you, Mark, not them. And if they can't support a wedding that honors what we value, then maybe they shouldn't come. The silence that followed was deafening. Vivian's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. Richard's jaw clenched so tightly, Sarah could see the muscle twitching. Preston and Caroline exchanged glances that clearly communicated they'd just witnessed something unprecedented in Sterling family history. Someone standing up to them. "How dare you?" Vivian finally said, her voice shaking with rage barely held in check. "How dare you come into our home and insult us? We've welcomed you into this family. We've tried to help you understand what's expected. We've offered to pay for a proper wedding, to introduce you to people who matter, to give you opportunities you could never access on your own. And this is how you repay our generosity?" Sarah stood up slowly, her movements controlled and deliberate. "Vivian, I appreciate that you believe you're being generous, but I don't need your opportunities. I don't need your connections. And I certainly don't need your money. What I need is for you to respect that your son is an adult who's chosen a partner based on love, shared values, and genuine connection, not social advantage." "Love," Richard scoffed. "Love doesn't pay mortgages, Sarah. Love doesn't maintain the lifestyle Mark has been accustomed to his entire life. Love doesn't secure your children's future or ensure their access to the right schools and the right opportunities. Love is a nice bonus, but it's not a foundation." The casual dismissal of love as merely a nice bonus crystallized everything Sarah despised about the Sterling worldview. They'd reduced human connection to transaction, emotion to strategy, relationships to assets that could be leveraged for social gain. They'd turned life itself into a business deal where the goal was accumulation and display of wealth, rather than actual happiness or fulfillment. Mark finally found his voice, standing up beside Sarah with visible effort. "Dad, that's not fair. Sarah and I are building something real, something honest. I'm sorry it doesn't meet your standards, but those are your standards, not ours." Vivian's laugh was harsh and brittle. "Your standards. Mark, you're 32 years old. You work at a nonprofit making $60,000 a year. Without family support, without the connections and resources we've provided, you'd be struggling to afford a decent apartment, let alone plan a future. Your standards are a luxury you can't afford without us." The cruelty of the statement landed like a physical blow. Sarah watched Mark's face crumble, watched decades of manipulation and control crystallize in a single moment of devastating clarity. This was what the Sterlings did. They wielded money like a weapon, used generosity as leverage, and ensured that love always came with strings attached. "We're leaving," Sarah said, taking Mark's hand. "Thank you for dinner." They walked out together, Sarah's spine straight and her head held high while Mark seemed to fold in on himself, diminished by his family's assessment of his worth. In the car, the silence stretched between them like a chasm neither knew how to cross. Mark drove mechanically, his hands gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. "I'm sorry," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry you had to hear that. I'm sorry they treat you this way. I'm sorry I'm not stronger." Sarah reached over and covered his hand with hers. "You're stronger than you know. But Mark, we need to talk about what happens after the wedding. Because this won't stop. Your family will always find ways to exert control, to make us feel less than, to use their resources as justification for interfering in our lives." "I know," Mark said miserably. "I've been thinking about it too. Maybe we should accept their offer for the venue. Maybe if we give them this, they'll back off on other things." And there it was. The slow erosion of boundaries, the gradual capitulation to pressure, the compromise that leads to another compromise until nothing of the original vision remains. Sarah had seen it happen in business countless times. People who started with principles slowly traded them away for convenience or approval or peace, until they woke up one day living someone else's life. No, Sarah said firmly. We're not giving them the venue. We're not changing the dress or the catering or the guest list. We're having the wedding we want, Mark. Because if we surrender on this, we'll surrender on everything. Where we live, how we raise our kids, what careers we pursue. Everything will be subject to their approval, their financial leverage, their judgment. Mark pulled over to the side of the road, turning to face her with tears in his eyes. But what if they're right? What if I can't provide for you the way you deserve? What if my stubborn insistence on doing meaningful work instead of joining the family business means you'll always struggle because of me? Sarah's heart broke, watching him wrestle with doubts his family had planted and nurtured throughout his entire life. They'd convinced him that his value was measured by his income, his worth determined by his willingness to conform, his love for her somehow insufficient without their wealth backing it up. Mark, listen to me, Sarah said, taking both his hands in hers. I don't need you to provide anything except yourself. Your kindness, your integrity, your genuine desire to make the world better. That's what I fell in love with. That's what matters. The rest is just noise. But even as she said it, Sarah knew the pressure would only increase. Over the next 2 weeks, the Sterling assault intensified with strategic precision. Vivian called Mark daily, each conversation a carefully constructed emotional manipulation designed to make him doubt his choices. Jennifer posted photos on social media of extravagant weddings with pointed captions about setting the bar high. Amanda sent Sarah links to wedding planners who specialized in elevating modest budgets, each message dripping with false concern. The day before a major wedding planning meeting, Richard called Mark directly. Sarah heard only Mark's side of the conversation, but the defeat in his voice told her everything. I understand, Dad. Yes, I know it reflects on the family. No, I'm not trying to embarrass you. I just thought, yes, I understand your position has social requirements. I know Mom's friends are asking questions. Dad, I love Sarah. That should be enough. Why isn't that enough? When Mark hung up, he looked 10 years older. He's threatening to cut me off completely. No more health insurance through the family plan. No more access to the vacation house. No more birthday money or Christmas gifts or emergency funds. He says if I'm adult enough to make my own decisions, I'm adult enough to be completely financially independent. Sarah felt rage building in her chest like a wildfire. The Sterling family weaponizing their wealth to force compliance was predictable, but still infuriating. They were teaching Mark that love was conditional, support came with strings, and family loyalty meant absolute obedience to their wishes. Mark, look at me, Sarah said urgently. We don't need them. We don't need their insurance or their vacation house or their money. We have each other. We have our values. We have a life we're building together. That's enough. But she could see the fear in his eyes, the deep-seated anxiety that came from 32 years of being told he couldn't survive without family support. The Sterlings had systematically destroyed his confidence in his own capability, ensuring he'd always be dependent, always be controllable, always be willing to sacrifice his own desires for their approval. The final assault came 3 days before the wedding, during what Vivian had described as a simple family lunch. To finalize last-minute details, Sarah arrived to find not just the Sterling family but also 5 of Vivian's closest friends, all prominent society women whose approval apparently mattered more than Sarah's comfort or consent. "Sarah, darling," Vivian said with poisonous sweetness. "I've asked some friends to join us because they have such wonderful insights about weddings. They're here to help." What followed was 2 hours of systematic destruction disguised as helpful advice. They critiqued every choice Sarah had made, from the botanical garden venue to the simple catering to the modest guest list. They expressed concern about the message such a modest wedding would send. They wondered aloud whether Sarah truly understood what she was getting into, marrying into such an established family. They made jokes about shopping at discount stores and choosing wine from the bottom shelf, each comment designed to remind Sarah of her perceived lower status. Through it all, Sarah sat quietly, her face calm, but her mind cataloging every insult, every condescending remark, every attempt to diminish her worth. She was building a case, gathering evidence, preparing for a revelation these people couldn't possibly imagine. Because Sarah had learned long ago that the best revenge wasn't anger or confrontation. It is taking your opposition by surprise. If you're finding this story compelling, make sure you hit that subscribe button. The revelation coming in the next part will completely shatter everything you think you know about this family dynamic. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. The morning of the wedding arrived with golden California sunshine filtering through the windows of Sarah's small apartment, casting soft light across the simple ivory dress hanging on her closet door. Her bridesmaids, college friends who'd known her long before she'd inherited her father's empire, gathered around her with genuine excitement and love that felt like an antidote to the Sterling family's poison. "You look absolutely beautiful," Maya said, helping Sarah with the delicate buttons running down the back of her dress. "And more importantly, you look happy. That's what matters." Sarah smiled, though her stomach churned with nervous anticipation not about the ceremony itself, but about the inevitable confrontation with Mark's family. She'd checked her phone that morning to find 17 messages in the Sterling family group chat. Most from Vivian expressing elaborate concern about the weather, the timing, the lack of proper coordination, the insufficient parking at the botanical garden. Each message was a passive-aggressive reminder that this wedding failed to meet their standards. At the botanical garden, the space had been transformed into something quietly magical. String lights woven through ancient oak trees created a canopy of soft illumination. Simple arrangements of local wildflowers and greenery adorned the white folding chairs. A small string quartet played softly near the makeshift altar. The whole setup had cost less than most people spent on wedding centerpieces, but it was exactly what Sarah had envisioned: authentic, intimate, and beautiful in its simplicity. The Sterling family arrived like an invading force, their disapproval evident in every gesture and expression. Vivian emerged from a black Mercedes wearing a dress more appropriate for a Met Gala than a garden wedding. Her jewelry so elaborate it caught sunlight like a disco ball. Richard followed in an obviously custom three-piece suit, checking his Rolex with theatrical impatience. Jennifer and Amanda wore matching expressions of barely concealed disgust as they surveyed the modest venue. "Is this it?" Jennifer said loudly to Amanda, making sure her voice carried to nearby guests. "I mean, I knew it would be small, but this is like a backyard barbecue, not a wedding. Where's the stage? Where's the dramatic entrance? Where's literally anything that would make this memorable?" Amanda pulled out her phone, snapping photos with exaggerated dismay. "Girl, I can't wait to show Courtney. Remember her wedding at the Four Seasons? The ice sculpture alone probably cost more than this entire event. This is what happens when you let people plan beyond their means. Or, I guess, technically, within their very limited means." Their voices carried intentionally across the garden, ensuring maximum humiliation. Other guests, mostly friends of Mark and Sarah who valued substance over spectacle, shifted uncomfortably. Some shot, disapproving. Glances at the Sterling family, but Jennifer and Amanda were too absorbed in their performance of superiority to notice or care. Vivian approached the wedding coordinator, a kind woman named Patricia who'd been nothing but supportive throughout the planning process. "Excuse me," Vivian said, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. "But where is the backup generator? What happens if there's a power issue with the sound system? And these chairs are plastic." Plastic! At a Sterling family wedding, this is unacceptable. Patricia maintained remarkable composure. "Mrs. Sterling, everything has been tested and checked. We have backup plans for every scenario. And these chairs were specifically chosen by the bride for comfort and sustainability." Sustainability, Vivian repeated, making the word sound like an obscenity. "How wonderfully progressive. I'm sure our guests will appreciate sitting on recycled plastic while they watch my son marry someone who values environmental messaging over their comfort." Mark, getting ready in a small room near the garden entrance, could hear his family's commentary through the open windows. Sarah watched his face pale, watched his hands shake as he adjusted his tie for the 15th time, watched the joy drain from his eyes as his family's judgment contaminated what should have been the happiest day of his life. "You don't have to go through with this," Mark said suddenly, turning to face Sarah with raw desperation in his eyes. "I would understand if you wanted to call it off. My family is horrible. They're ruining everything. You deserve better than this circus." Sarah took his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her gaze. "Mark Sterling, I am marrying you today. Not your family. You. And nothing they say or do will change that. Let them judge. Let them mock. Let them reveal exactly who they are. Because when this day is over, we'll be married, and they'll have to live with the knowledge that their cruelty couldn't break us." But even Sarah, with all her preparation and resolve, wasn't fully ready for the ceremony itself. As she walked down the aisle, her father's absence hitting her like a physical blow, she could hear the Sterling family's commentary continuing even during what should have been a sacred moment. "Look at that dress," someone whispered loudly. It was Mark's cousin, Brandon. "I've seen bridesmaids in more elaborate gowns. Did she buy that off the clearance rack?" "The flowers are weeds," Aunt Caroline said to Uncle Preston, her voice carrying across the quiet garden. "Literally weeds from the side of the road. This is what passes for decoration now? In my day, we had standards." Richard sat stone-faced in the front row, checking his phone periodically as if he had more important matters demanding his attention than his own son's wedding. Vivian dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, but the tears seemed more theatrical than genuine. A performance of maternal suffering rather than joy. The officiant, a kind-faced woman who'd been a family friend of Sarah's father, tried to maintain the ceremony's dignity, but the Sterling family's running commentary made it nearly impossible. When Mark and Sarah exchanged their simple gold bands, Jennifer actually laughed out loud, a sharp bark of disbelief that echoed through the garden like a gunshot. "Those rings probably cost less than my Apple Watch," she said to Amanda, not even bothering to whisper. "This is embarrassing. This is literally embarrassing for our entire family." Mark's vows were beautiful, heartfelt words about finding someone who loved him for who he truly was, not what he represented or could provide. But even as he spoke, Sarah could see him glancing nervously at his family, could see the way their judgment diminished his confidence, could see 32 years of conditioning, making him question whether his love was sufficient without their approval. Backing it up. When the ceremony ended and guests moved to the reception area, a simple covered pavilion with string lights and long wooden tables, the Sterling assault intensified. The catering was farm to table, fresh and locally sourced, but modest in presentation compared to the elaborate displays common at high society weddings. The wine was good, but not pretentious. The cake was homemade by a talented local baker, 3 tiers of vanilla and lavender with simple buttercream frosting. "Where's the champagne tower?" Richard demanded of a server, his voice loud enough to turn heads. "Where's the premium bar? You're telling me my son's wedding is serving house wine and beer from local breweries? This is a joke. This entire thing is a joke." Vivian gathered her friends around her like a general marshalling troops, and together they conducted a systematic audit of every element of the reception, finding fault with everything. The music was too quiet. The lighting was insufficient. The dance floor was too small. The appetizers were pedestrian. The seating arrangements put people of importance next to people of no social consequence. Every observation was designed to establish Sarah's inadequacy as a bride, a host, and a future Sterling family member. But it was during dinner that the cruelty reached its peak. Richard stood up, clearing his throat to make a toast that immediately silenced the room. Sarah's stomach dropped. She'd specifically requested that toasts be limited to her maid of honor and Mark's best friend, both of whom would speak with kindness and genuine affection. Richard's impromptu speech was a power play, a final assertion of control. "I'd like to say a few words about my son," Richard began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Mark has always been unique in this family. While his siblings and cousins pursued traditional paths to success, Mark chose to follow his heart. To work in nonprofits, to prioritize what he calls meaningful work over financial security. We've respected that choice, even when we didn't understand it." The word respected dripped with irony. Everyone in the room could hear the subtext. We've tolerated his disappointing choices. "And now," Richard continued, his smile sharp as a knife, "Mark has chosen a bride who shares his values. Someone who believes, as he does, that love matters more than stability. That authenticity matters more than image. That being true to yourself matters more than family expectations or social position. Sarah, welcome to the Sterling family. We hope you're prepared for what that means." The threat in those final words was unmistakable. Sarah stood up slowly, her movement drawing every eye in the garden. She could feel the moment crystallizing, could feel the weight of every insult and dismissal and condescending comment from the past months converging into a single point of decision. She could stay silent, let Richard's toast stand as the final word, accept her assigned position as the disappointing daughter-in-law who failed to elevate the family's status, or she could respond. "Thank you, Richard," Sarah said, her voice calm and clear. "That was quite illuminating. But before we continue with dinner, I'd like to share something with everyone here. Something I think will reframe some assumptions that have been made about me, about this wedding, and about the choices Mark and I have made." Vivian's eyes narrowed suspiciously. Jennifer and Amanda exchanged confused glances. Mark looked at Sarah with mixture of fear and curiosity, unsure what she was about to reveal. The garden went silent except for the soft music from the string quartet and the evening breeze moving through the oak trees. "I've let this family believe certain things about me," Sarah continued, her gaze sweeping across the assembled guests. "About my background, my resources, my position in life. I've let you assume I'm a struggling administrative assistant who couldn't possibly understand your world of country clubs and expensive vacations and designer everything. I've let you judge this wedding as the desperate attempt of someone planning beyond her means, trying to punch above her weight, failing to meet the Sterling family's exacting standards." She paused, letting the tension build, watching confusion and anticipation play across faces around the garden. Mark reached for her hand, squeezed it gently, a gesture of support, even though he had no idea where she was going with this speech. But the truth, Sarah said softly, is very different from what you've assumed, and I think it's time you knew exactly who your son is marrying. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the string quartet had stopped playing, the musicians as captivated as everyone else by the sudden shift in energy. Sarah felt the weight of the moment, the culmination of months of deliberate deception and careful planning, the revelation that would shatter the Sterling family's worldview like a hammer through glass. This was it. The moment everything changed. And Sarah was ready. Sarah reached into the small clutch she'd carried down the aisle, pulling out a single folded piece of paper with the calm deliberation of someone who'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her mind. Mark's eyes widened slightly, recognition dawning that whatever was about to happen, Sarah had planned for it. The garden remained suspended in absolute silence, every guest leaning forward slightly, magnetically drawn to the unfolding drama. 6 months ago, Sarah began, her voice steady and clear. When Mark and I got engaged, I made a choice. I chose not to tell his family about my background because I wanted to see who they really were, not who they pretended to be when trying to impress someone with resources, not who they became when they thought there was something to gain, but who they actually were when they believed themselves superior. Vivian's face had gone pale. Richard's expression shifted from smug superiority to something approaching concern. Jennifer's phone hung forgotten in her hand, her usual performance of disdain temporarily interrupted by genuine confusion. My father, Sarah continued, was Thomas Chen. Some of you may recognize that name, others may not. He deliberately stayed out of the public eye, avoided Forbes lists and society pages, built his empire in the shadows because he believed true wealth wasn't something you displayed. It was something you stewarded. The name Thomas Chen rippled, as Chen, through the crowd like a stone thrown into still water. Some guests gasped audibly. Others pulled out their phones, immediately Googling, their faces transforming as search results populated screens. Mark's best friend, David, who'd known about Sarah's background from the beginning, watched the Sterling family with barely concealed satisfaction as their expressions shifted from confusion to dawning horror. Thomas Chen, someone whispered. The tech innovator? The guy who held patents on like half the algorithms that power cloud computing. He died 2 years ago, another guest murmured, their voice carrying in the shocked silence. Left everything to his only daughter. It was in the news briefly, but the estate was so private nobody knew details. Sarah unfolded the paper in her hands, a simple printed document that would validate everything she was about to reveal. When my father died, he left me his entire estate, not just money, 17 companies, majority, shares in 34 others, patents that generate revenue every single day, investments, properties, and assets that most people couldn't comprehend even if they saw the full portfolio. She paused, letting the information settle, watching as the Sterling family's faces transformed from pale concern to ash-gray horror. Richard had stopped breathing. Vivian's hand had gone to her throat as if she couldn't get air. Jennifer and Amanda looked like they'd been physically struck. The total value, Sarah said quietly, is approximately $2.5 billion. With a B, I am, by any objective measure, one of the wealthiest people under 40 in the state of California. I don't work as an administrative assistant. I administer my father's empire. I sit on boards. I approve billion-dollar deals. I run a foundation that gives away more money annually than your entire family has accumulated across 3 generations. The paper in her hands was a statement from her investment firm, printed that morning, showing a snapshot of her portfolio. She held it up, watching as nearby guests craned their necks to see the numbers that validated her claims. The document was real. Every word she'd spoken was documented, provable, undeniable. Mark's face had gone through a rapid evolution of expressions: shock, disbelief, dawning understanding, and finally something like awe, mixed with a hint of betrayal that she'd kept this from him. Sarah would have to address that later, in private, but right now she had a different audience that required her attention. This wedding, Sarah continued, gesturing to the simple garden, the modest catering, the lack of ostentation, cost me approximately $30,000. That represents about 0.001% of my net worth. For context, that's equivalent to someone with a $100,000 net worth spending $1. This wasn't a budget wedding because I couldn't afford better. This was the wedding I chose because it reflected our values. The silence was deafening. Someone's fork clattered against a plate, the sound like a gunshot in the suspended atmosphere. Vivian had gone from pale to flushed red, her carefully applied makeup suddenly standing out stark against her skin. Richard's jaw worked soundlessly, words apparently failing him for perhaps the first time in his life. "The dress you mocked," Sarah said, looking directly at Jennifer, "cost $1,200 not because that's all I could afford, but because I fell in love with it. I could have purchased every dress in that boutique without noticing the expense. I chose this one because it made me feel beautiful, not because it impressed people whose opinions I don't value." Jennifer made a small wounded sound, like air escaping from a punctured tire. Amanda had actually dropped her phone, the device lying forgotten in the grass at her feet, while she stared at Sarah with an expression of absolute devastation. "The botanical garden," Sarah continued, her gaze moving to Vivian, "was selected because my father proposed to my mother here 35 years ago. This place has meaning that your country club, with all its marble and exclusivity, could never provide. I could have rented out the most expensive venue in the state. I could have flown in guests on private jets and housed them in luxury hotels and hired celebrity chefs and orchestra. I chose not to because those things are empty performances for people who measure worth in dollars rather than significance." She turned to address the entire gathering, her voice gaining strength as she moved toward her conclusion. "For months, I've watched Mark's family judge me. They've questioned my taste, my intelligence, my suitability as a sterling bride. They've offered to pay for upgrades because they assumed I was too poor to afford proper wedding trappings. They've insulted me, condescended to me, and tried to remake me into something more acceptable to their narrow definition of worth." Vivian stood up abruptly, her chair scraping back with jarring violence. "Sarah, I don't know what game you're playing, but this is inappropriate. This is cruel. On your wedding day, to make up stories, to humiliate us." "Sit down, Vivian," Sarah said, her voice cutting through Vivian's protest with surgical precision. "I have documentation. I have witnesses. I have lawyers and accountants and financial advisors who can validate every single claim I've made. But more importantly, I have your text messages, your voicemails, your emails, every insult, every condescending comment, every attempt to control or diminish me has been saved, documented, and cataloged." She pulled out her phone, scrolling to the Sterling family group chat, projecting it onto a tablet that David quietly brought forward and set on the table where everyone could see. Months of messages scrolled past. Vivian's commentary about Sarah's inappropriate clothing choices, Jennifer's photos of expensive items with captions about setting standards, Richard's pointed questions about Sarah's ability to provide Mark with a proper lifestyle, Amanda's links to etiquette courses and social coaching services. "Here," Sarah said, pointing to a particularly cruel message from Jennifer sent just 3 days ago. "Your daughter wrote, 'Can you imagine Mom having to introduce Sarah at the club?' Hey everyone, meet my new daughter-in-law who shops at Target and thinks sustainability matters more than style. How mortifying. That was sent to your entire family. 47 people saw it. 32 of them liked it, including you, Vivian. Vivian's face crumbled. She sat down heavily, all her aristocratic bearing collapsing under the weight of her exposed cruelty. Richard reached for her hand, but his own was shaking, his legendary composure shattered by the revelation that the woman he'd dismissed as unworthy was actually far wealthier than his family could ever hope to be. Mark had been silent throughout Sarah's revelation, but now he found his voice. You're worth $2.5 billion? His tone wasn't accusatory, just stunned, trying to reconcile this information with the woman he'd known for 2 years. Sarah turned to him, her expression softening. Yes. And I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, but I needed to know that you loved me for who I am, not what I have. Your family has spent your entire life teaching you that worth equals wealth, that money determines value, that status matters more than character. I needed you to choose me without that variable influencing your decision. I would have chosen you anyway, Mark said quietly, tears in his eyes. I love you, not your money, not your empire. You. I know, Sarah said. That's why I'm marrying you. She turned back to the Sterling family, who looked like they'd been hit by a collective truck. Uncle Preston had actually stood up and was backing away slowly, as if physical distance might somehow erase his participation in the family's systematic mockery. Aunt Caroline had covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking in what might have been sobs or shocked laughter. I want to be very clear about something, Sarah said, her voice taking on an edge that made several guests shiver. I don't owe you this information. I don't owe you an explanation for my choices. I don't owe you anything. But I'm sharing it now because I want you to understand something crucial about your son and your family. She gestured to Mark, standing beside her with tears streaming down his face. Mark is worth more than any of you have ever given him credit for. Not because of his last name or his family connections or his access to your wealth, but because he's kind, because he's principled, because he chose to work in nonprofits not despite your disapproval, but because of his genuine desire to help people. He's the only person in your family worth knowing, and you've spent his entire life trying to break him into conformity. Richard opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Sarah, we didn't know. If we'd known who you were, that's exactly the point. Sarah interrupted, her voice sharp as broken glass. If you'd known who I was, you would have treated me completely differently. Not because I deserved better treatment, but because you respect wealth more than humanity. Your values are so fundamentally warped that you can't see people, only price tags and social advantages. She picked up the tablet showing the family group chat, scrolling to another section. Here's a message from Vivian sent 6 weeks ago. I'm genuinely concerned that Mark is ruining his future with this marriage. Sarah seems sweet, but she brings nothing to the table. No connections, no money, no family with influence. This is a strategic disaster. Strategic disaster. As if marriage is a business merger rather than a union between two people who love each other. Vivian was crying now, real tears that smeared her elaborate makeup. I was trying to protect him. I was trying to ensure his security, his future. No, Sarah said firmly. You were trying to control him. You were using fear and financial manipulation to ensure he never developed independence from your influence. And you were willing to destroy his happiness to maintain that control. The wedding reception had transformed into something unprecedented, a reckoning. Guests sat frozen, witnesses to a revelation that would be talked about in social circles for years. Some looked horrified at the Sterling family's exposed cruelty. Others looked satisfied, as if they'd always suspected the Sterling's generosity came with unacceptable strings attached. David, Mark's best friend, finally broke the silence with a slow, deliberate clap that echoed across the garden. "Sarah Chen," he said, his voice carrying. "That was the most magnificent takedown I've ever witnessed. Absolutely brilliant, brutal, perfect." A few other guests joined in the applause, tentatively at first, then with growing enthusiasm. Not everyone clapped. Some of Vivian's society friends looked uncomfortable, perhaps seeing reflections of their own values in the Sterling family's exposed prejudices. But enough people applauded that the sound became a crescendo, a validation of Sarah's choice to finally reveal the truth. Mark pulled Sarah close, whispering in her ear, "You're terrifying and amazing, and I love you so much." Sarah smiled, but her attention remained on the Sterling family. "I'm not trying to humiliate you," she said, her voice gentler now. "I'm trying to teach you something your wealth has apparently insulated you from learning. People have value that exists entirely independent of their bank accounts. Respect isn't something you grant conditionally based on perceived status. And family isn't about maintaining an image or protecting a legacy. It's about love, support, and accepting people for who they actually are." The paper she'd been holding, the investment statement, still lay on the table. Richard stared at it with the expression of someone watching their entire worldview collapse in real time. The numbers were incomprehensible to him, not because he didn't understand wealth, but because he couldn't comprehend that someone he'd dismissed as insignificant actually operated in a different stratosphere entirely. Are you still watching? Drop a comment below, telling me your reaction to Sarah's revelation. This is the kind of storytelling that changes how you see the world. Stay with me for the powerful conclusion. The aftermath of Sarah's revelation rippled through the garden like aftershocks following an earthquake. Vivian had collapsed back into her chair, her carefully constructed facade of superiority crumbling into something approaching genuine remorse. Though whether she mourned her cruelty or simply the loss of perceived advantage remained unclear. Richard stood frozen, his phone hanging uselessly in his hand. All his confident assertions about providing for Mark's future suddenly revealed as hollow presumptions from someone who dramatically overestimated his own importance. Jennifer was the first to attempt damage control, standing up with the desperate energy of someone watching their social standing evaporate in real time. "Sarah, I had no idea. If I'd known, I never would have. Those messages were just jokes. You know how family group chats are. Nobody actually meant—" "Stop," Sarah said, the single word cutting through Jennifer's babbling with surgical precision. "Don't insult both of us by pretending those messages were jokes. You meant every word. You believed every condescending assessment. You genuinely thought you were superior to me based on nothing more than assumptions about my bank account and your family's position in society." Amanda tried a different approach, her voice taking on a pleading quality that might have been convincing if Sarah hadn't spent months documenting her particular brand of cruelty. "Sarah, we were protecting Mark. You have to understand. He's always been vulnerable to people who might take advantage of him. We've seen it before. Women who date him for access to the family, who see him as a meal ticket or a social upgrade. We were just being cautious." Mark's laugh was bitter and broken. "That's rich, Amanda. Really rich. You weren't protecting me. You were protecting your image, your status, your ability to control who I married based on whether they elevated the Sterling name or diminished it. Sarah was never the threat. You were." Uncle Preston cleared his throat uncomfortably, attempting to inject some rationality into the chaos. "Perhaps we should take a moment. This has been shocking for everyone. Sarah, Your revelation changes things significantly. I think if we could all just calm down and discuss this privately, as a family. No, Sarah said firmly. We're not taking a moment. We're not discussing this privately, because privacy is how families like yours maintain dysfunction. It's how you hide abuse behind closed doors and call it maintaining appearances. Everything that needs to be said will be said here, now, in front of everyone. She gestured to the assembled guests, many of whom were still filming on their phones, capturing this moment for posterity, or perhaps for social media virality. Sarah didn't care. Let the world see. Let this become a case study in what happens when judgment based on wealth and status encounters reality. I want address something directly, Sarah continued, her voice carrying across the garden with a clarity that commanded absolute attention. Some of you might think I'm being unnecessarily harsh, that I'm humiliating this family for my own satisfaction or revenge. But here's what actually happened over the past 6 months. She pulled up more messages on her tablet, scrolling slowly so guests could see the sheer volume of correspondence. Vivian called me 47 times, not to build a relationship or get to know me, to criticize my choices and offer corrections. Richard questioned Mark's judgment in 17 separate conversations, always ending with financial threats disguised as concern. Jennifer posted 32 separate social media items designed to make me feel inadequate. Amanda sent me links to etiquette courses, wardrobe consultants, and style coaches, each one accompanied by messages about helping me become more appropriate for the Sterling family. The numbers hung in the air like an indictment. 47 calls, 17 conversations, 32 posts. The systematic nature of the campaign was undeniable, each family member playing their assigned role in a coordinated effort to break Sarah's will and remake her into something more acceptable. This wasn't casual judgment, Sarah said quietly. This was warfare. Psychological, emotional warfare designed to convince me I was less than, unworthy, embarrassingly inadequate. The goal was to make me so uncomfortable that I'd either transform myself to meet your standards or leave Mark entirely. And when neither happened, you escalated. The lunch with Vivian's friends 3 days ago was supposed to be the final push, the intervention that would finally break me. Aunt Caroline, who'd been present at that lunch, made a small sound of protest. Sarah, that was meant to be helpful. We genuinely wanted to offer guidance. You told me, Sarah interrupted, her voice sharp, that if I went through with this wedding as planned, I would become a laughingstock. That society would mock Mark for marrying beneath him. That my modest choices would haunt our children's futures because I'd established us as people without taste or resources or proper breeding. You didn't offer guidance. You offered threats disguised as wisdom. The specific recall of those words landed like physical blows. Caroline's face flushed deep red, her earlier composure evaporating under the weight of her exposed cruelty. Other guests who'd witnessed parts of the Sterling campaign looked uncomfortable, perhaps recognizing similar behaviors in their own families or social circles. Mark moved closer to Sarah, his hand finding hers, their fingers interlacing with the natural ease of two people who'd found genuine connection despite systemic opposition. I want to say something, he said quietly, his voice steadier now. To my family, but also to everyone here. He turned to face his parents directly. You taught me that love was conditional. That support came with strings attached. That family loyalty meant sacrificing my own values and desires for your approval. You taught me that my worth was measured by my income, my status, my willingness to conform to your expectations. And I believed you. For 32 years, I believed that without your money and connections and validation, I was somehow incomplete or inadequate. His voice broke slightly, emotion overwhelming him, but he pushed forward. Sarah showed me that was a lie. Not by telling me, by being exactly who she is, confident without arrogance, wealthy without ostentation, powerful without needing to prove it to anyone. She chose a modest wedding not because she couldn't afford elaborate, but because elaborate didn't matter to her. She chose me not because of what I could provide, but because of who I am when I'm not trying to live up to impossible standards. Vivian was sobbing, now genuine wrenching sobs that shook her entire frame. Mark, sweetheart, we only wanted what was best for you. We wanted to protect you from making mistakes. From making mistakes? Mark's laugh was harsh. Mom, the biggest mistake I almost made was listening to you. I almost let your judgment convince me that Sarah wasn't enough, that our love wasn't sufficient without your money backing it up. I almost destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me because you'd spent my entire life conditioning me to prioritize your values over my own happiness. The brutal honesty created a silence so profound that the evening breeze through the oak trees sounded like a roar. Richard looked like he'd aged a decade in the past hour, all his confident assertions revealed as the hollow posturing of someone who'd fundamentally misunderstood what actually mattered in life. Sarah squeezed Mark's hand, then addressed the Sterling family with a gentleness that somehow made her words even more devastating. I don't hate you. I don't even particularly blame you. You're products of a system that prioritizes wealth over character, image over authenticity, status over substance. That system has damaged you in ways you probably don't even recognize. It's stolen your ability to form genuine connections, to trust people's motivations, to find value in anything that can't be quantified or displayed. She paused, letting that assessment sink in. But here's what's going to happen now. Mark and I are married. We're building a life together based on our values, not yours. You're welcome to be part of that life, but only if you can respect our choices and treat me with basic, human dignity. Not because you now know I'm wealthy, because that's how people deserve to be treated, regardless of their bank accounts. Vivian stood up slowly, unsteady on her designer heels, approaching Sarah with tentative steps like someone approaching a wild animal. Sarah, I'm so sorry, truly sorry. Not because you're wealthy, but because I was cruel. I was dismissive and judgmental, and I hurt you. I hurt Mark. I let my fears about image and status blind me to what actually mattered. Is there any way you could forgive me? The question hung in the garden air, weighted with genuine desperation. Sarah studied Vivian's face, searching for authenticity beneath layers of sophisticated makeup and practiced social performance. What she found was complicated. Genuine remorse mixed with social calculation, real regret tangled with concern about reputation, actual love for Mark compromised by decades of prioritizing appearance over substance. I can forgive you, Sarah said finally. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending the past months didn't happen, or that your treatment of me was acceptable. It means I'm willing to move forward if you're willing to genuinely change, not just your behavior toward me specifically, but your entire approach to measuring people's worth. Richard approached more slowly, his legendary confidence completely shattered. When he spoke, his voice was smaller than anyone had ever heard it. Sarah, I've spent 30 years building what I thought was important. A company, a reputation, a position in society. I taught my children that these things mattered most, that success was measured by visibility and influence and wealth. Standing here now, watching my son marry a woman worth more than I could earn in 10 lifetimes, all I can think is that I've wasted those 30 years teaching the wrong lessons. The admission was so raw, so unexpected, that several guests actually gasped. Richard Sterling acknowledging he'd been wrong was apparently unprecedented in family history. Jennifer and Amanda stared at their father like he'd started speaking a foreign language. "I don't know how to fix this," Richard continued, tears now visible in his eyes. "I don't know how to rebuild trust or repair the damage, but I want to try. Not because you're wealthy and could benefit my business or social position, but because you love my son, and he loves you, and I've finally realized that's worth more than anything I spent my life chasing." Mark moved toward his father, the two men meeting in an embrace that was awkward and unpracticed, but genuinely emotional. Decades of distance couldn't be erased in a moment, but perhaps this was a beginning. A crack in the armor of Sterling family dysfunction wide enough to let actual connection seep through. Sarah addressed the assembled guests, many of whom had tears in their own eyes, moved by the raw humanity on display. "I want everyone here to take something from today. Not just the drama or the revelation or the spectacular nature of the Sterling family's comeuppance, but a deeper lesson about how we measure worth in 2026. She gestured around the modest garden reception. "This wedding cost $30,000. It could have cost $30 million. The difference doesn't matter. What matters is that it reflected our values, celebrated our love, and brought together people who actually care about us. That's worth more than any amount of money I could have thrown at impressing people whose opinions don't actually enrich my life." David, Mark's best friend, stood up and raised his glass. "I'd like to make an actual toast now, if that's okay. To Sarah and Mark, two people who just taught us all a masterclass in integrity, authenticity, and what real strength looks like. May your marriage be as honest and powerful as the moment we just witnessed." The toast was echoed around the garden, glasses raised in genuine celebration rather than obligatory gesture. The mood shifted gradually from shocked tension to something approaching joy, as if Sarah's revelation had somehow freed everyone present from performing expectations they'd never questioned. As the evening progressed, the reception transformed. The simple food was enjoyed rather than criticized. The modest decorations were appreciated for their natural beauty. The lack of ostentation became refreshing rather than embarrassing. Guests who'd arrived with the Sterling family's judgmental mindset found themselves questioning their own values, wondering how many times they'd dismissed or underestimated people based on superficial assessments. Vivian approached Sarah again as the sun set, casting golden light through the oak trees. "I know I don't deserve it, but could we start over? Not pretending today didn't happen, but building something new from here?" Sarah considered the request carefully. "We can try, but it requires real work, Vivian. Examining why you judged me so harshly. Questioning the value system that prioritizes image over substance. Being willing to see people as they are rather than as representations of social advantage or disadvantage. Are you capable of that kind of introspection?" Vivian nodded slowly. "I don't know, but I want to learn. Mark deserves a mother who sees him, really sees him, not just his role in maintaining family legacy. And you deserve a mother-in-law who treats you with respect, not because of what you have, but because of who you are." It wasn't a guarantee of transformation, but it was a beginning. Sarah had learned from her father that people revealed their true character when they believed themselves superior or under pressure. The Sterling family had revealed theirs thoroughly. Whether they could change, whether genuine connection could be built from such a damaged foundation, remained uncertain. But as Sarah stood with Mark, watching their guests dance under string lights while his family struggled to process their shattered assumptions, she felt something approaching peace. She'd protected herself by hiding her wealth. She'd tested Mark's love by removing financial influence from their relationship. She'd documented the Sterling family's cruelty with methodical precision, and she'd revealed the truth at the exact moment when it would cause maximum impact and deliver maximum lessons. Was it worth it? Mark asked quietly, pulling her close. The months of abuse, the judgment, letting them treat you that way, just to prove a point? Sarah smiled, kissing him gently. It wasn't about proving a point. It was about understanding reality. Your family's true character, your true character, my own strength and resilience. Now we know exactly what we're working with. No illusions, no pretenses, just honest understanding of who everyone actually is. As the night deepened and the reception wound down, Sarah reflected on the message she hoped people would take from this day. Not that wealth makes someone superior or that revenge is satisfying, but that human worth exists independent of bank accounts. That respect should be freely given, not conditionally, granted based on perceived status. That families can be toxic even when wealthy and respectable. That sometimes the kindest thing you can do is hold up a mirror and force people to see themselves clearly. The modest garden wedding the Sterling family had mocked became legendary in San Francisco society, not because of its simplicity, but because of what it revealed about the people doing the mocking. Stories spread about Vivian's shocked face, Richard's broken composure, Jennifer and Amanda's desperate backtracking. But more importantly, conversations began about how many other Sarah Chens existed in the world. People of substance and worth who'd been dismissed or underestimated based on superficial assessments. 3 months after the wedding, Sarah received a letter from Vivian. Not a text or email, but an actual handwritten letter on expensive stationery, the kind of formal communication that indicated serious intent. "Dear Sarah," it began, "I've spent the past 3 months in therapy, working through patterns I established decades ago. Patterns of judgment, of measuring worth by external markers, of letting fear about image and status poison my relationships. I'm writing not to make excuses, but to acknowledge that I damaged my son through years of conditional love and impossible standards. I'm working to change. It's harder than anything I've ever attempted, and I fail regularly. But Mark deserves better. You deserve better. And I'm committed to becoming someone capable of providing that. Thank you for having the courage to reveal the truth, even knowing it would devastate us. It was the kindest cruelty anyone has ever shown my family. With genuine remorse and hope, Vivian." Sarah showed the letter to Mark, who read it with tears streaming down his face. Change was possible. Redemption wasn't guaranteed, but it was achievable for people willing to do the difficult work of self-examination and growth. The Sterling family would never be perfect, but perhaps they could become better. Perhaps they could learn to measure worth by character rather than wealth, to offer respect freely rather than conditionally, to build connection based on genuine care rather than social calculation. And perhaps, Sarah thought, that was the real story worth telling. Not about a billionaire heiress who destroyed her in-laws with a perfectly timed revelation, though that made for excellent drama, but about the possibility of transformation. About families learning to love unconditionally. About people choosing substance over image. About the slow, difficult, essential work of becoming better than the systems that shaped us. As Sarah and Mark built their life together, they made choices that honored both their values and Sarah's resources. They lived modestly, but gave generously. They maintained privacy about their wealth, but leveraged it for meaningful impact. They chose experiences over possessions, connection over status, authenticity over performance. And slowly, painfully, the Sterling family learned to respect those choices, not because they fully understood them, but because they'd finally realized that understanding wasn't required for respect. The modest garden wedding became a symbol of something larger, a reminder that worth can't be measured by price tags or perceived status. That judgment reveals more about the person judging than the person being judged. That power wielded quietly is often more substantial than power displayed ostentatiously. That love, real love, exists independent of financial advantage. That families can heal even after devastating revelations, if they're willing to choose growth over pride. Years later, when Sarah and Mark told their children about their wedding day, they didn't focus on the drama or the revelation or the Sterling family's spectacular comeuppance. They focused on the choice to be authentic, to build something real, to measure success by values rather than valuations. They taught their children that wealth was a tool, not an identity. That respect was earned through character, not granted through status. That the most important things in life, love and integrity and genuine connection, couldn't be purchased at any price. And they taught them one more crucial lesson, perhaps the most important one of all, that people will reveal their true character when they believe themselves superior or secure. The measure of a person isn't how they treat those they perceive as equals or superiors, but how they treat those they believe are beneath them. It's easy to be kind to people you think can benefit you. The real test of character is kindness without expectation of advantage. The Sterling family had failed that test spectacularly, but in failing, they'd been given an opportunity for transformation. Not all of them took it. Jennifer remained largely unchanged, her values too deeply rooted in social performance to easily shift. Amanda made some progress but struggled with genuine change versus performed redemption. But Vivian and Richard, confronted with the devastation their value system had caused, did the hard work of rebuilding themselves. It wasn't a fairy tale ending where everyone became perfect and all wounds healed completely. It was a realistic ending where damaged people chose growth, where flawed families worked toward better, where mistakes were acknowledged and amends were attempted even when full redemption remained elusive. And perhaps that was more valuable than any fairy tale, because it reflected the messy, complicated reality of actual human connection and transformation. Sarah's father had taught her that true wealth wasn't about accumulation or display, but about stewarding resources responsibly and using power to create positive change. She'd honored that lesson by building a life of substance over spectacle, by choosing authenticity over image, by measuring success through impact rather than appearance. And in doing so, she'd taught the Sterling family and everyone who heard their story what real worth actually looked like. As the years passed and the story became legend, people forgot the specific dollar amounts and remembered instead the lesson underneath. That kindness matters more than status. That character transcends bank accounts. That families who measure worth by external markers damage themselves more than anyone they judge. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply be yourself with absolute confidence, letting others' assumptions and judgments reveal their own limitations rather than yours. Sarah Chen walked through life knowing her worth, both financial and human, existed independent of others' assessment. She loved fully, gave generously, and lived authentically. She'd married Mark not despite his family's judgment, but perhaps because overcoming that judgment together had forged a bond stronger than any easy path could have created. She'd revealed her wealth not for revenge, but for redemption. Not to prove superiority, but to prove that superiority itself was an illusion created by people too insecure to recognize inherent human value. And in the end, that was worth more than $2.5 billion. Though having both certainly didn't hurt,